All right. Oh, and we are live. Perfect. There we go. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So it takes a couple minutes just for everyone to get in here. We're linking in Facebook. We're linking into YouTube right now. But Woody, Woody, Moe. There we go.
I know it's a
How are
mouthful.
you? I know it is a mouthful. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. Thank you so much for joining us. So today we have our webinar, Basepaws webinar about Pet Insurance 101. So we have Woody Mawhinney here from Policy Advisor. And Policy Advisor is an insurance education and an opportunity platform to kind of connect to providers. And of course, I'll let Woody explain it a little bit better on there. But, Woody, let's just start kind of tell us a little bit about Policy Advisor and how did you get to where you are with Policy Advisor?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much for having me on. So Policy Advisor is an educational platform, like you mentioned. It's a comparison site like Priceline for pet insurance. And we do two things. We try to find the right coverage for your pet at the best possible price. And a lot of pet owners aren't even really aware of the common health risks of their particular breed of animal. And so we try to bring that to light and ultimately find great coverage. So that way, if something does come up, you can get it treated by the vet without thinking about, the financial aspect of that decision. I founded Policy Advisor because I went through a lot of health issues with my Shar-Pei. So I adopted my Shar-Pei dog when he was, only a little puppy and didn't realize the health risks that Shar-Pei have. And he came down with a breed-specific disease called Shar-Pei fever. And I was told by my vet that it would cost $250 a month to treat him with medication. And so I had to navigate insurance right off the bat with my own pet. I found it pretty complex to navigate, and I thought the process should be improved. And you shouldn't have to spend hours researching your options to find the best plan. So that's why I started Policy Advisor.
Well, and that's such a common sudden issue that we see, and what I've seen so much with clients is these animals, cats and dogs that you are very close to family, and then you run into the clinic for what can be a very sudden thing, a very underlying thing, whether it be breed specific or just kind of general life traumatic issues, and all of a sudden it's this extremely stressful decision, not just from a medical perspective, but now a financial decision as well, for both you and the veterinarian. So how, when we start to think about pet insurance, how does pet insurance really approach those different aspects for people?
Yeah, so maybe a good place to start is sort of what is pet insurance and how is it different and and similar in some ways to human insurance, right?
Yeah.
There is no concept of co-pays when it comes to pet insurance. It's actually sort of a different non-human-like experience. And there are really three different types of pet insurance. The main pet insurance out there is something called accident and illness insurance. It covers what it sounds like. So you typically purchase it, and then about 2 weeks later, you get covered for anything from diseases to scratches, surgeries, emergencies, hospitalizations. The big things that can occur in your pet's life. And then there's something called accident-only insurance, which is much less common, and that covers just your accident-related issues, so scrapes, cuts. Maybe broken bones, those sorts of things. And then there's something called wellness insurance, which a lot of pet owners are interested in these days, and that covers your routine care. So from vaccines to dental cleanings, spay-neuter procedures, more of the day-to-day type of stuff that you would go to the vet for. The way you interact with pet insurance typically is you buy your insurance policy. It covers your pet after about 2 weeks. And when you go into the vet, you typically pay up front for a procedure. And when you file a claim with the insurance carrier, you're reimbursed in a matter of days. Now, what a lot of people don't necessarily understand are some of the exclusions or differences between these plans, which can be pretty substantial. For something like hip dysplasia, which some cats can come down with and some breeds are more susceptible than others, the waiting periods can really range from a handful of days to upwards of a year. And so if you've got a pet that might be more susceptible to those things, you might want to choose a policy that would cover those conditions right off of the bat. And so, there are those sort of fine print things that a lot of pet owners really should consider, but find it difficult to navigate. And that's the sort of thing that we try to uncover.
Okay. Well, and that is, like you mentioned, it starts to become so complicated with all the inclusions and exclusions of problems and exactly what your problem is. So kind of how do you help people, I'm just kind of thinking about the process in my mind, do you get the info from them first and then start to match them to a plan? And then how do you go from how do you work them through that process and kind of match them to inclusion or exclusion for risks they may want to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So we ask just a handful of questions like any insurance provider will ask. We need your pet's breed, age, zip code, gender. These all sort of affect the underwriting of insurance. And we integrate directly with insurance providers to get real-time pricing. And so we can look for, different coverage options and compare the different coverage options and then find price differences that we can sort of bring to the top of the page in the form of sort of a streamlined comparison view of your options, so you can learn relevant aspects of a plan up front without having to dig for it.
Yeah. Well, and so we have a question right now that was coming from the Gibson Chronicles, but apparently the cat mom does not have Facebook, so the cat dad is going to use that here, so she's using cat dad's one on here. But how long do we have from an all clear health checkup from the vet to research and insurance? So is there any concerns? Do you need medical records? Do you not need medical records? Kind of getting things started from there. Is that what's that beginning process look like?
Yeah, definitely. What we recommend certainly is to get a health checkup either shortly after buying the insurance policy, or if you've had one in the past year, typically that serves as a benchmark for future care. And so, one of the most common things that we get asked about is the concept of pre-existing conditions, because most insurance providers do not cover pre-existing conditions. Now, there are some nuances to that. If you've got a condition that has been cured for a certain period of time, like 180 days, and you can verify that it's been cured in the form of two different health checks, one before the condition and one after, saying that, from your vet that it has been cured, there could be a chance that that condition, which did exist in the past but was cured, could be covered in the future. But for the most part, we tell people, get that baseline health check, so that way there's proof that your pet's healthy. And if your pet comes down with anything in the future, the insurance company can look at those records, and your vet can look at those records and see that this is a new condition after the waiting period of the policy.
Yeah, it gives them that nice, really clear story of how that disease developed and when it developed from that standpoint.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so, we kind of talked a little bit about nuts and bolts. We kind of started jumping straight into nuts and bolts. How do we get things? What do we get things? So when we think about cat insurance, we kind of roll this back and make this a little bit higher on here. When we think about pet insurance for cats, what do you see as kind of, or what do you hear as why? What's the driver behind that? What's so important behind that?
Yeah, so really the important thing about insurance is that it reduces financial risk. You are protecting yourself from the multi-$1,000 vet bill. And a lot of pet owners, unfortunately, are in the position where they can't afford the cost of care. And we actually did a survey of about 20,000 pet owners and found that only about a fifth of them could afford something like a $5,000 veterinary. And so, oftentimes people think about insurance when it's too late, when they're already in the waiting room of the hospital or their pet has already been diagnosed with a condition. And so, it's really important for pet owners to think ahead, right? If you adopt a new kitten, to think about sort of the lifetime expenses of that cat and budget for it appropriately. And for a lot of pet owners, they're starting to turn to insurance as a way to minimize that financial exposure for a low cost of about an average of about $30 a month. But, that cost is very variable. That's an average cost that the typical cat owner will pay for insurance. But depending on the region of the country, if you're in an area like New York City, like I am, it can be double the expense. Because zip code affects the cost of veterinary care in that area, and that is included in the cost of the insurance. So certainly I think that people are really looking at insurance to limit that financial exposure.
And so for cats, what's the most common diseases that you see that people use insurance for?
Yeah, absolutely. And the most common conditions in cats isn't always the most frequently claimed, by an insurance perspective. So the most common claims that we see, for one of our partners, Pets Best, they see, kidney failure in about 10% of their claims. Now, 30 to 40% of cats over the age of 10 come down with kidney issues, and it can cost thousands of dollars to treat, right? Other conditions that are relatively common include hyperthyroidism, cancer, diabetes, allergies, inflammatory bowel disease, gastrointestinal issues, and to be honest, UTIs are one of the most commonly claimed conditions that cats encounter. And the problem with UTIs, of course, is that sometimes they go untreated. Cats in particular don't necessarily show symptoms, and it's really difficult to detect. And a UTI is a condition that can have significant complications if not caught and treated early.
And you mentioned so many of those diseases there right now. Kind of one of the things that start to come to mind is the length of those diseases, the chronicity of those diseases itself. Diabetes, hyperthyroidism, some of these diseases that are much longer and kind of slower diseases to occur, and then also to treat as well. And that's, that kind of reminds me of your Shar-Pei fever. That length of that and that burden that is being helped relieve for so long on there.
And then, on the other side of things, you have sort of sudden conditions, right? If a cat ingests, linear object like a string or something like that, or eats, a toxic plant, or maybe jumps out of a window, which, has happened, those are sort of the conditions that you're also protecting against with insurance that you can't necessarily predict. As pets age, health risks go up. I mean, that's the same across human health, right? And those are a little bit more predictable, but insurance for the most part not only protects those long-term conditions, but the sudden emergencies as well.
Yeah, and I know this is going to sound. We talked about it a little bit. We didn't get specific numbers there, and I love to always see the numbers because I think it's so important for people to see. When we look at health insurance, kind of what's the value, the kind of expected or potential savings that people can look at?
Yeah, well, I can. This is a question that hits home, right? Because I have two dogs, and my Shar-Pei, who came down with this condition, we pay $250 a month for his medication, but we pay around $120 for his insurance. And so every month I'm now essentially making $100 off of my insurance. On top of that, my dog has had a CCL tear, which is the equivalent of an ACL tear in humans, and that cost about $6,000 to treat. And pet insurance covered 90% of the cost of his condition. So on the whole, most people will not see a profit, so to speak, from insurance. That's not really what insurance is there for. It really is to help mitigate the financial consideration associated with sort of a one-time large expense. And if you just look at some of the larger claims associated with cats, for example, like a cat jumping out of a window and breaking a bone or something like that, those sorts of complications, and then you have to think about, the age of the animal, what sort of lifestyle the animal will have after that injury. But, that can be, closer to $20,000 for the most expensive claims. And so for a cost of $30 a month, versus, having to pay a one-time $20,000 vet bill. That's where the value of insurance becomes much clearer. And when you start talking about some of these most common claims, like a kidney issue, you could be talking $700 a year in just management costs, which is twice the amount that you'd be spending on insurance. So the experience that people have with insurance is very different, because it's tough to predict what conditions your pet will come down with. But if you're, it creates peace of mind for many pet owners that, when the time comes, unfortunately, they will be in a better situation to accept the gold standard of care from the veterinarian.
Yeah. And, with cats, I think it is so important. You mentioned that stat a little earlier, that 30 to 40% of cats over the age of 10 have some level of kidney failure. Almost every single cat that ever came through clinic doors on there, as they get older, there's always those issues to manage from there. Cats do a good job of hiding them for a long time, but they are very common in almost all of the cats that we see come through those doors.
Right.
Yeah. So from you mentioned a little bit from like a breed or kind of a mixed perspective. Actually, I'm gonna cut this off real quick and make a quick jump to a question. Sure. This is again from Gibson on there, but there's so much that goes along with diet these days. We have a lot of advertising, a lot of marketing, a lot of push concerning diet, whether it be raw or kibble or grain-free or anything that's out there. We see a lot of different competing information. Now, how does this look when affecting? Can this affect an insurance policy?
So typically, a prescription diet is really what we get asked about most of the time. Now, so far, diet does not impact insurance premiums. And what I mean by that is, by going on a particular diet that's vet approved, that's not going to give you a discount on your insurance. Maybe sometime in the future that will be the case once it's better understood the impact of diet on certain health conditions. But typically we get asked about prescription diets as they relate to things like allergies or surgery that may have taken place. And not every insurance company treats diet the same way. Most insurance providers actually do not cover like a Hill's prescription diet or something along those lines. Now, there are some caveats, where some insurance providers may cover it as like an add-on to the core accident and illness policy. But again, you will need to have been enrolled in the insurance policy prior to the condition occurring that requires you to purchase that prescription diet.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. It'll be interesting to see when that comes into play, because I'm certainly how fast do you see the pet insurance industry evolving right now?
Yeah, it's evolving very, very quickly. And that's partly with the introduction of new companies entering the space. So what we've seen is that Lemonade is entering pet insurance. There's going to be a new option in the US that likely will cover some aspect of pre-existing conditions before long. I'm definitely expecting that being a part of the industry, because it's one of the biggest needs for pet owners who are struggling to cover the cost of medical care. And then some of the largest insurance providers, Nationwide and Trupanion, are actively looking at things like diet or potentially bundling products, whether it be like a smart collar or something like that to document your pet's activity, right? Which can also play a big role in health risks over time. So I think there's a lot of innovation taking place. We're probably still a few years away from some of those new technologies and coverage options becoming available, but I think it's definitely going to be in the next decade for sure.
And that's so exciting to be able to use that kind of mesh with all of that technology. I know we're able to use it in the pet space in such a different manner than the human space to do some of those really, really interesting aspects and those evolutions. Now, we're talking also kind of about things evolving. You mentioned at the beginning about pet insurance, how it largely is reimbursement based, so that you get to go and reimburse. Is there a movement to move away from that towards more of that similar what we see in the human side, where the insurance kind of plays that more active role right from the beginning?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There are some options currently available where the insurance company will pay the vet directly for a
Mhm.
bill. And most frequently that's in the form of you get an estimate from your vet for a procedure, you get essentially pre-approval for the procedure, and that way you don't have to pay as much out of pocket.
Okay.
I definitely think those options will become much more robust. But a lot of the veterinarians that we speak to around the country are extremely wary about pet insurance becoming similar to human insurance. What we don't want to have happen is have insurance companies negotiating rates for certain kinds of procedures. And so one of the things that we're focused on at Policy Advisor is helping the industry grow in ways that are veterinary approved. Because we do hear all the time that we don't want the industry to become as complex or as embedded necessarily in the veterinary experience. So just wanted to highlight that point because it's really important and something that veterinarians talk about all the time. Because when we talk about financial considerations when it comes to veterinary treatment, just as it affects the pet owner to go through a distressing situation like that, it definitely affects your veterinarian too. And they have to have difficult conversations, sometimes upwards of 10 times a day. And you can imagine the fatigue that generates in the vet. And it's something that is often described as compassion fatigue, where they don't necessarily want to be involved in the financial decision of the pet owner because they see that as a very personal decision. But at the same time, they want to be able to provide gold standard care. They became a vet for a reason because they love animals and they want to treat them and help them live their healthiest and happiest lives. And so they see insurance as helping them be able to provide that care. And what they don't want to happen is have any sort of financial ties that would affect their ability to provide the best care possible at the best available rate.
Mm-hmm. And that is such. I can't stress that enough. That from my concern that we want. I as a veterinarian, I understand that fatigue. Those are tough days when they happen on there. And having that ability to have those decisions, those financial decisions, be not as difficult to be like, yeah, let's do this. Let's go in. Let's give it our best shot and follow that gold standard is a conversation that I'd love to have, and that veterinarians around the United States and the world love to have, because that's really why they're there to work and get that done. Now, so you mentioned you were trying to avoid it becoming as complicated as human insurance on there. And so are there any specific initiatives that are going on? Is there anything that people can do to help, or what are y'all working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we're working on as Policy Advisor is to streamline the whole experience and make it as data-driven, objective, and transparent as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's basically done a few different ways, right? It's by providing a really good user experience where you don't have to pay to ask a question about the right insurance product for you. And to be honest, sometimes insurance isn't the right product for everybody. And it's important to acknowledge that if you are dealing with a current accident or illness, which may have driven your interest in insurance, there could be other options available to you in the form of perhaps it's a care credit or scratch pay, which are two, essentially low interest, short-term loan solutions. Or maybe it's as simple as a grant program where you don't have to pay back the cost of the care. And sometimes those are offered via the vet or through a local humane society. And a lot of people aren't even aware of those options today. And so what we try to do is just provide the most objective analysis we can and share as much information about a policy as possible so you know what you're buying. You know what you get out of the experience. The worst thing that can happen is you are sold a policy and it doesn't cover what you expect it to cover, because then not only are you out of pocket a certain amount of money for the insurance premium, but then you're in no better of a situation when you actually are reliant on the policy to cover the cost of care for that loved one. Then on the other side of things, where I think we add value, right, is in communicating with the insurance company, because we were just talking about innovation in this space and being able to communicate ways that insurance should be innovated upon and ways that it can grow to benefit pet owners. I think you're starting to see some of that innovation. I'll just speak to one of those innovations in recent months. So Nationwide, which is the oldest insurance provider in the US, has now started to cover wellness in the same way that they cover accident and illness. So you have a deductible and a reimbursement rate, as opposed to sort of an itemized schedule with limits per procedure. Because the common way for wellness insurance to be covered is, to give you $50 for an annual wellness checkup, to give you up to $100 for vaccines for the year. And that's not going to cover the full array of expenses that you might need to pay for over the course of the year. And so now these insurance companies are sensing that in the feedback from consumers and adapting their policies to be more sort of umbrella-like, so that way they cover things in very simple terms.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. That that convolutedness, I think we can cut that down, like you mentioned, with so many technology efficiencies that we're able to implement now to really hone in on exactly what folks need from each of their pet insurance. Now, let's give a kind of an overarching look at the insurance. How's pet insurance doing? Is it growing? What's the market currently look like, and then what does that mean for people or for customers?
Yeah, it's growing really, really quickly. It's one of the fastest growing lines of insurance in the U.S. And there are so many more options today than there were even 5, 6, 7 years ago. And you're seeing human health insurers move into the space, as well as other larger players. Like, just a few days ago, Lemonade Insurance announced that they were launching pet insurance, primarily driven through their existing distribution channels. So if you own a homeowner's or renter's policy, they're going to give you a 10% discount on your insurance if you buy pet insurance through Lemonade. MetLife also acquired a pet insurance company called Pet First, and they can offer it as an employee benefit to existing partners. You have some of the auto insurers starting to sell discounted pet insurance. Subaru recently announced a deal in that space. You have Farmers Insurance, who sells the full array of auto and so it's pet insurance most commonly is being added as a line by these existing pet insurance companies. And there are two problems in the pet insurance space that are inhibiting growth, and one is awareness and one is acceptance. And on the awareness side, that problem is quickly being solved with all of these new companies, including Zoetis, the largest animal health company in the world, launching a company in New York that's expanding nationally. You have more advertising dollars being spent on insurance, so that way people are going to be learning more about it. And then you have companies like Policy Advisor that's working with veterinarians to streamline the insurance experience for everybody involved with objective analysis. And all of a sudden, you'll have the most important stakeholder in pet care, hopefully having a more enjoyable experience with it and being willing to talk about it, because they do value it. They just don't have time necessarily to talk about it in their 10 to 15 minutes with a client, right? They need a more streamlined experience sometimes. So, the awareness piece, again, is being solved. On the acceptance side, that involves developing better products, streamlining products, offering better customer support, reimbursing more for common procedures. And that too, with increased competition, you have companies needing to develop more compelling products. So I think both of those are being solved right now, and we're at a very big inflection point where most pet owners, either through their employer, through the vet, via advertising on Google, Facebook, they're going to be seeing more and more activity in the pet insurance space. But our hope is, and our expectation is that shouldn't mean more confusion. It should mean better products, better care for your animals, and you can use sites like comparison sites to be able to get the education that you need to make an informed decision.
And that is like I say, I'm thrilled to hear it. The more and more competition, the better products that we're going to see come on out of here. Now, we've got some questions that are starting to kind of come up, and so we'll switch to those real quick again and chat. So we've got one from Tony, this is Archer the cat on here. And so, this kind of relates back to that health proof from the vet. Is this typically a checkup, or is there something specific that needs to be done for the insurance itself?
Yeah, so typically it's just a wellness checkup. And most commonly in a veterinary note, they'll say whether they've identified anything or if your pet's, healthy and good condition. There will be documentation of that. And, best practice, I think, is to just ask your vet to make a note if they think that your pet's general health is good, because if that's explicitly stated in the wellness checkup, that's the gold standard from an insurance perspective, because then it's very clear, gave it a full exam and nothing was found, pet's healthy, and then next time your pet comes down with something, it's very clear what has happened since that initial checkup.
Yeah. And so there is, unlike human, or I don't know if there is one in human for specific health as well, but it is just kind of a normal checkup as well. And they also had a follow-up question, and this is a bigger question because it will that kind of is right towards your line, right towards policy.com's line, is what should we be looking out for when selecting for pet insurance?
Yeah. There's probably more than we can even talk about on a single webinar, right? The deeper you dig, the sort of more information that you gather, and you can get decision fatigue very, very quickly. Generally speaking, all of the major insurance providers can do a good job for a pet. They can cover all of the main, accidents and illnesses that your pets can come down with. But, the most important thing to understand really is that, it's our belief that there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all policy. When somebody says that they had a good insurance provider or experience with an insurance provider, it doesn't necessarily mean somebody else will have a good experience with that provider or that the same coverage will be available. Some insurance coverage is only available in certain zip codes. Sometimes they have modified coverage depending on where you live. And a common difference too in any sort of pet, dog or cat, is how they treat mixed breeds. So 60% of pets that are insured are mixed breed animals, and so you can imagine the insurance companies trying to figure out, well, what kind of mixed breed do you have? And they don't discriminate between 1% versus 50%, a sort of mix. And the difference in insuring those sorts of breeds can be upwards for a cat of 20 to 30% in price, versus a dog can be upwards of, you could be talking 40% differences if you were to specify what kind of mixed breed that you have versus going with a generic mix. Sometimes it's important to say what kind of mix that you have. Other times you might want to enroll as a generic mix, because it could be an opportunity to save money and you might not be sure of what kind of mix that you have. So, I'll give you an example of this, right? I've got a Great Dane mix or a Rhodesian Ridgeback mix, and some insurance companies have that as a breed. Other insurance companies say, that's just a large mixed breed dog. Well, the problem is really that if I go with one insurance provider, they might charge me 40% more than going with another insurance provider just because of that discrepancy. And so, this is one example, but it's a situation where it can be a lot of information to navigate yourself. And that's why, I founded Policy Advisor to make that as streamlined as possible. Let's do the analysis ourselves. Another thing that I think is really important for pet owners to be aware of that I haven't touched on yet is something that is unfortunate, but makes a lot of sense. Prices go up over time for insurance. As your pet ages, their health risks increase. Yeah. And insurance is priced accordingly. So you can expect to pay more money over your pet's lifespan as you retain the insurance. The problem that exists in the market is that that's not always transparent. And you want to buy an insurance policy that isn't just cheap today, but is going to save you the most money possible over your pet's lifespan. And so you need to be thinking not just in terms of the near term, but over the long term, what you can afford and what makes the most sense for your budget. So one of the things that we look at is how much is that pet insurance, projected to cost over your pet's lifespan. And certain breeds have different average lifespans. And so we try to do that analysis to say, okay, whereas this policy may be cheaper today, we can see that over a 15, 17-year period for some cats, that will cost way more than a certain policy. And that's difficult to project because, it's not it's not a precise science, because some of these insurance companies have a longer history of being in business and having standardized rates and not increasing those rates over time. So it is a bit complex, and it's an imperfect science. But we try to incorporate as much data as possible to help pet owners make the most informed decision possible. And it's really important to be budgeting for those increases over time.
And that's such a great point. One that rarely gets brought up is the lifetime of that insurance policy. I think that's something that we get kind of very tunnel visioned on what's going to affect my animal in the next year, and kind of look at it from a year by year standpoint. And so this long-term ability to see and do that comparison is fantastic. Now, we've got a lot of folks that are, this brought up a lot of nice questions on there. And folks, I want to remind everyone, just if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll get to them. We'll be able to answer all your questions so that we have this as much of a conversation as helpful as possible. Now, I know this is we're going to call this a question that's straight up your alley on there. We might have joined a little late. Cass might have been a little late, but what is the best way to search for insurance policies with ease? It becomes overwhelming very quickly.
Right, and I'm a bit biased here, but we're trying to develop the easiest way for you to navigate the space on policy.com. And so, one of the things that we allow you to do after you enter your pet's information is compare the different coverage options side by side. So when you go to the results page after entering that information and click on a policy, you can scroll down and actually do a side-by-side comparison of the different coverage options, as well as the differences between some of the different brands for all of the different cases that may come up. You can also get a sense of cost differences between the different providers. And at this point, I believe we're the only comparison site that does that. Most frequently, there are other educational resources out there, and they're more in the form of, a written blog sort of post about it. And so there are lots of fantastic resources you can go to just by Googling pet insurance to learn more about it and to learn more about the different options. And hopefully resources like Policy Advisor make it an even easier process for you to navigate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, this is actually also a really interesting question that's coming back from Gibson and came off of this is, I'm sorry, that's Cassie again on here. From a comparative list, how do you prioritize things? There's so many different things that we've mentioned in this entire different time, whether it be long-term coverage and like she mentioned, a price or breed. Like in your mind, is there any like specific list that you have as like major ones that you like to think about and let people know more about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it gets really tricky because we've spent the last 2 years analyzing these different options and modeling out the different coverage options and the expenses associated with each one. And you could have a 2-year-old Great Dane and a 6-year-old Great Dane, and you might want to choose different insurance policies and brands for those 2 dogs just based on age. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things that I'm wary about when it comes to just sort of, tables of comparing, one option to the other is that it is very personalized for a particular pet. Whether it be the zip code, the age, the breed, even the gender, that can all impact what sort of insurance you should be thinking about. Now, when it comes to 5 to 10 different brands, that's relatively easy to think about just because there aren't that many brands in the US. And so, you'd be looking at all of the sort of major ones, and that could be, Pets Best, Nationwide, Trupanion, Healthy Paws, some of the bigger companies that a lot of people have heard of. And now, honestly, that you have other options like Lemonade entering the space, that's where the list is going to be growing exponentially. So chances are, after you draft up that comparison view, you might need to add a few more rows. Hopefully, being able to use like a comparison site makes it a little bit easier. But the best place to start if you are creating a table would just be to look at the major providers that have been around for maybe 5 to 10 years at least. Or ones that are backed by really large companies where that product has gotten ample thought before launch and is going to be there for the pet owner over the course of their lifespan.
Okay. Well, and unfortunately Gibson cut out just a little bit there, but like say you last heard the very personalized part, but yeah, looking for those larger major ones, more popular ones, like you mentioned, when you're doing those comparison tables. But like that is a great answer to look at and look through those. And if you do want to do one of those by yourself, that is a great way to start to look and sort through that way. Now, this question I do hear come up a lot, and I honestly I don't know the answer to this question as well. But this one is there basically, when's the quote unquote best time? Is there a best time? Should you do it when they're kittens, or is there anything you need to wait for?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to consider it right when you adopt your animal. And most pet insurance is purchased within 6 months of adoption. Mm-hmm. And most commonly it's purchased when you have a young animal. And that gets back to the pre-existing conditions issue. You want to ensure that your pet has had a wellness check, that your pet is healthy, and there really is no better time to go on insurance than when your pet is really young and you know for certain there are no health issues already. And when you think of the risk of a pet, and this is true for kittens just the same as it is for dogs, typically if you have a juvenile or adolescent animal, they aren't yet trained. They really love to get into sort of mischievous scenarios. And for a cat, maybe that's chewing on a string. You're opening a present or something like that, and then you kind of wonder to yourself, where did the packaging go? For a dog, it could be as simple as eating a tennis ball, or something outside like a stick that leads to a stomach-related issue. And they just don't know any better because they haven't been trained. And so, some of the most unexpected conditions can happen when a pet is very, very young. And then, if that condition has already occurred, if it were to occur in the future, there's a chance it might not be covered by insurance. So getting it when your pet is very young is, what I consider to be best practice. But it's not to say that pet owners who have older pets shouldn't consider insurance, especially cat owners, because a lot of cat owners keep their cats indoors, and they may not have come down with something like a UTI or a kidney issue. And so there is plenty of time to get insurance and cover those sort of future unexpected costs, because chances are they're still healthy right now.
Mm-hmm. And we talk about that, and we're already having so many about. I wish I knew about policy a couple weeks ago, and happy to spread those, or even from Naka about how insurance has really helped save so much. Our hard times, help herself during those hard times of unexpected conditions, whether they be for or whether they be the older cats on there. Now, we have asked a lot of questions on there. Oh my goodness, we've got so many on here coming up. We've got another one that are you seeing companies provide unlimited lifetime limits rather than specific dollar limits per year? Is that changing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because we're seeing a bit of a combination of both. Limits affect the price of the plan, as you can understand. Just like deductible and reimbursement rate, if you have a lower deductible and a higher reimbursement rate, which is to say that the amount of money that you're reimbursed after you file a claim for a certain condition, chances are the policy is going to be more expensive. And that's the same for an annual limit. When it comes to limits, there are two kinds of limits that pet owners need to be aware of. There's a per incidence limit, and then there is an annual limit. And some insurance companies have the sort of per incident limit, and other insurance companies, or per incidence deductible, say, and others have sort of the unlimited plan. And I'd say it's much more common for companies to have sort of the unlimited or a high limit nowadays, because again, what they're trying to limit is the number of pet insurance companies, the number of pet owners who are encountering issues and having to navigate that. Sometimes it's easier to communicate with everybody involved just to say, you don't have to worry about an annual limit. You got sort of best in class coverage, and all you have to be thinking about is two things now: deductible and reimbursement rate. That's an easier conversation for everybody. Mm-hmm. But, for cat owners, and dog owners, even the most expensive procedures will still, be under $100,000. So that's where, I think Lemonade's really interesting, and we've been analyzing their plans over the past couple of days since they just came out with their plans. They have, $100,000 limit. And by narrowing those limits or lowering those limits, sometimes there's an opportunity to help a pet owner save money, but still give them definitely the limit that they would need to cover just about anything their pet could come down with. So the most common limit we see that pet owners buy are either $20,000 or unlimited. Those are definitely the most common.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. That 100,000 sounds like a nice line that limits their liability, but still gives a lot of the owners the ability to tackle pretty much any problem in the world that would ever come up from there.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Yes, we are. I know I'm just rapid firing questions at you. I appreciate I appreciate that that you're taking the time to be able to answer all these questions for.
Yeah, this is what I love to do, so I'm happy to do it.
Perfect. Now, let's see. And we've got one more again about, is the premium lower if the pet is younger? And that's, I'm going to kind of leave that one up to you as well.
Yeah. So typically there might be, from the base rate that's presented to a pet owner, it might be 7 to 10%, lower.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a puppy or a kitten. And typically, this is where it's really important to understand how fast they can increase. The price can increase really anywhere between about 5% and 35% year over year. And, by the time your pet is 10 years old, you might be paying double what you paid when they're a puppy or a kitten. Mm-hmm. By the time they're a senior pet, for a cat, maybe that's upwards of 15 to 20 years, you could be paying 3 to 4 times what you were originally paying. But given the health risks of your pet, you might be having to pay more out of pocket for veterinary care. That's why the insurance goes up. But certainly the insurance is inexpensive, relatively speaking, to what you could be paying later on in life when your pet is younger.
Mm-hmm. Now, like I say, thank you so much on here. I've spent a lot of time kind of guiding this and conversation and asking questions about where I'm coming from and where our customers are coming from. But I know this is a huge topic, like a huge topic that we can probably sit around and chatter out for a while. But what are we missing here? What have I not asked you? What have we not asked you? That's an important question that people need to know about, or just about pet insurance in general.
Yeah, so I think the point I really want to stress to everybody is to spend some time, take a moment, sort of document your budget and think about, caring for your animal over a long period of time. And a lot of people, go to the vet and really struggle to afford the cost of care. And, I know the vets that we talk to wish that more time and attention was spent thinking about sort of the long-term costs of care. And, veterinarians are a fantastic resource for that, right? They obviously are busy people, but they want what's best for your pet. And, I think just having even a 5-minute conversation about what you can sort of expect to pay. And that's where you can sort of think about, and plan for, maybe insurance makes sense for you, or, maybe putting something in a savings account or using some of these other resources that I've talked about could be beneficial for you. But one of the things I just really, want everybody to take away from this conversation is just to spend a little bit of time thinking about it, because I know that you'll benefit, your pet will benefit, and your veterinarian will greatly appreciate it as well. Because everybody wants what's best for your furry family member, and this will help that take place.
Perfect. Well, again, folks, join me in thanking Woody. Woody, who's the CEO at Policy Advisor, which is www.policy.com. It's a comparison site to help you understand and more about and find a pet insurance policy that works best for you for the now and for the long term as well. Woody, thank you so much for coming on, answering all of our questions about pet insurance.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciated it.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, folks, everyone, you all have a great afternoon and a great weekend, and we'll see y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.